Have you ever noticed someone at a party who seems completely comfortable listening to everyone else's stories but quietly disappears the moment attention turns their way? Or maybe that's you, and you've always wondered why being in the spotlight feels less like an honor and more like standing under a blazing interrogation lamp? If you're an INFJ, this probably hits close to home. You're not shy, you're not scared, but something about being the center of attention just feels wrong. It's like wearing shoes that don't fit, no matter how much others insist they look great on you. Today, we're going deep into the INFJ mind to uncover the real reasons why this personality type, often called the advocate or the counselor, would rather work behind the scenes than take a bow on stage. And trust me, these reasons go way beyond simple introversion. Stick around because by the end of this video, you'll understand why INFJs operate the way they do, and if you're an INFJ yourself, you'll finally have the words to explain what you've always felt but couldn't quite describe. Let's get into it. 1. The weight of being seen. Here's the thing about INFJs. When they're in the spotlight, they don't just feel watched. They feel analyzed, dissected, and examined under a microscope. It's not paranoia. It's their heightened awareness of how others perceive them. INFJs possess something called extroverted feeling as their secondary function. This means they're incredibly tuned into the emotional atmosphere around them. They can sense shifts in mood, pick up on unspoken tensions, and read between the lines of what people say. It's like having emotional radar constantly scanning the environment. Now imagine standing in front of a crowd with that radar turned up to maximum volume. Every facial expression, every slight shift in body language, every whisper, the INFJ picks it all up. What might feel like exciting energy to an extrovert feels like sensory overload to an INFJ. They're not just giving a presentation or accepting an award. They're simultaneously processing dozens of emotional signals from everyone in the room. And here's where it gets exhausting. INFJs can't just turn this off. Their brains are wired to notice these things. So when they're in the spotlight, they're working on multiple levels at once, delivering whatever they're supposed to be doing while also managing an overwhelming flood of social and emotional information. It's mentally draining in a way that's hard to explain to people who don't experience the world this way. For an INFJ, avoiding the spotlight isn't about being modest. It's about self-preservation. 2. The authenticity dilemma. INFJs value authenticity above almost everything else. They'd rather be genuine and rejected than fake and accepted. But here's the problem with being in the spotlight, it often demands a performance. Think about it. When you're the center of attention, there are expectations. People want you to be confident, eloquent, entertaining, or inspiring. There's pressure to present yourself in a certain way, to play a role that fits what everyone's expecting. For an INFJ, this creates an internal conflict. They can sense what the audience wants from them, thanks to that extroverted feeling function we talked about. They could probably deliver it too. INFJs are surprisingly good at adapting to social situations when they need to, but doing so feels like betraying themselves. It's like being asked to wear a mask at the exact moment you most want to be real. The spotlight creates this weird paradox where you're supposed to be yourself, but only the version of yourself that everyone's comfortable with. And INFJs can smell that inauthenticity from a mile away. They'd rather step back and let someone else take the attention than compromise their core values. For them, staying true to themselves is worth more than any applause or recognition, even if that means being misunderstood as standoffish or unambitious. This isn't stubbornness. It's integrity in action. 3. Energy depletion and overstimulation. Let's talk about the INFJ social battery, because it's not like everyone else's. INFJs are introverts, which means they recharge through alone time. But it's more complicated than that. Being in the spotlight doesn't just drain their social battery. It throws the whole power grid into chaos. When an INFJ is in a low-key setting, having a one-on-one conversation or working quietly on a project, they can manage their energy pretty well. They know when to engage and when to pull back. But the spotlight removes that control entirely. Suddenly, they're locked into a situation where they have to be on for an extended period. They can't step away when they feel overwhelmed. They can't take a breather to process their thoughts. The attention keeps coming, and their internal resources keep draining, with no opportunity to recharge. And it's not just mental exhaustion. INFJs often experience physical symptoms too. Their heart might race, their palms might sweat, or they might feel a tightness in their chest. This isn't fear exactly, it's their nervous system responding to overstimulation. After being in the spotlight, many INFJs report needing hours or even days to fully recover. They might feel emotionally raw, mentally foggy, or just deeply tired. It's like they've run a marathon while everyone else thinks they just gave a quick speech. This isn't weakness or fragility. It's simply how their neurology works. INFJs have learned through experience that the temporary validation of being in the spotlight rarely outweighs the extended recovery period that follows. 4. The perfectionism trap. Here's something most people don't realize about INFJs. They're perfectionists, but not in the way you might think. They're not perfectionists about external things like having a spotless house or a flawless appearance. Their perfectionism is internal and relational. They hold themselves to impossibly high standards when it comes to how they show up in the world and how they impact others. When an INFJ is in the spotlight, this perfectionism goes into overdrive. They're not just thinking about what they're saying or doing. They're thinking about how it might be interpreted, whether they're being helpful or harmful, whether they're living up to their own values, and whether they're making the positive impact they intend. It's exhausting because there's no way to meet these standards perfectly. No matter how well something goes, an INFJ will replay the moment later and pick apart every tiny mistake or awkward pause. They'll wonder if they offended someone with a particular word choice or if their message was misunderstood. This critical inner voice becomes louder when they've been in the spotlight. And over time, INFJs learn that avoiding the spotlight means avoiding this painful self-analysis. They'd rather work behind the scenes where their inevitable imperfections feel less consequential. It's not that INFJs can't handle being in the spotlight. They can, and often they do it remarkably well. But the mental price they pay afterward feels too steep. So they opt out whenever possible, not because they can't do it, but because they know themselves well enough to understand the cost. 5. Privacy as a precious resource. INFJs guard their inner world like a sacred treasure. And for good reason. It's where they process everything, make sense of their experiences, and maintain their sense of self. Being in the spotlight threatens this privacy in ways that make INFJs deeply uncomfortable. When you're visible, people start making assumptions about you. They form opinions, create narratives, and think they understand who you are based on limited information. For an INFJ, this feels invasive. They know that what people see on the surface is just a fraction of who they really are. Their inner world is complex, nuanced, and constantly evolving. The spotlight flattens all that complexity into a simple, digestible image that bears little resemblance to their actual experience. There's also the issue of vulnerability. INFJs are selectively vulnerable. They'll share deeply personal things with people they trust in private settings, but exposing themselves to a crowd feels reckless. It's not about shame or secrecy. It's about knowing that their depth and complexity will likely be misunderstood or oversimplified. When INFJs share something personal, they want to know it's being held carefully. They want to trust that the listener will appreciate the nuance and honor the vulnerability being offered. In the spotlight, they lose that control. Their words or actions can be interpreted any number of ways, and they have no say in how people understand them. So INFJs protect their privacy by staying out of the spotlight. It's not antisocial. It's self-protective. They're choosing quality over quantity, depth over breadth, and meaningful connection over broad visibility. 6. Mission over recognition. Here's where INFJs really stand out from the crowd. They're not driven by personal recognition. They're driven by impact. While other personality types might be motivated by praise, awards, or status, INFJs are focused on whether their actions are actually making a difference. They want to know that they've helped someone, changed something for the better, or contributed to a cause they believe in. The spotlight often feels like a distraction from this real work. INFJs would rather spend their energy on the mission itself than on receiving credit for it. In fact, public recognition can sometimes feel like it cheapens the work they're doing. Think about it this way. If an INFJ helps someone through a difficult time, they don't need that person to announce it to the world. The private gratitude and the knowledge that they made a difference is more than enough. Adding a public spotlight to that moment would actually take away from the genuine connection that made it meaningful in the first place. This isn't false modesty or playing small. It's a fundamental difference in what INFJs value. They measure success by internal standards. Did I stay true to my values? Did I help someone who needed it? Did I contribute to something meaningful? External validation just doesn't factor into the equation much. So when opportunities arise to be in the spotlight, INFJs often pass them along to others. They're genuinely happy to let someone else take the credit if it means the mission continues moving forward. For them, the work is the reward, and visibility is just a potential complication. 7. The misunderstood minority. Let's address something important. INFJs make up only about 1 to 2% of the population. They're the rarest personality type, which means they've spent most of their lives feeling like they don't quite fit in. Being in the spotlight amplifies this sense of being different. When an INFJ stands in front of a group, they're acutely aware that most people don't think the way they do. The connections they make, the patterns they see, the values they prioritize, these things often don't resonate with the majority. This creates a lonely feeling. Even when an INFJ is receiving praise or recognition, they might feel fundamentally unseen. People are applauding the external achievement, but they're missing the deeper meaning that made it significant to the INFJ. Over time, this experience of being misunderstood becomes wearing. INFJs start to feel like there's no point in seeking visibility when true understanding is so rare. They'd rather invest their energy in the few relationships where they do feel genuinely seen and appreciated. There's also the challenge of explaining themselves. When you're in the minority, you're constantly having to justify or explain your perspective. Why do you care about that? Why does this matter so much to you? Why can't you just lighten up? These questions, asked in good faith or not, remind INFJs that they're operating on a different wavelength than most people. And being in the spotlight just invites more of these exhausting exchanges. So they retreat to where they're more easily understood, in small groups, one-on-one conversations, or in their creative work where their depth is an asset rather than something that needs explaining. 8. Emotional exposure and vulnerability hangover. INFJs feel things deeply, like really deeply. And when they're in the spotlight, those feelings don't just disappear. In fact, they often intensify. Here's what happens. An INFJ steps into a visible position. Maybe they're giving a presentation, accepting an award, or leading a meeting. During the event, they're focused on managing the situation and meeting expectations. But afterward, the emotions they suppressed or set aside come flooding back. This is what some INFJs call the vulnerability hangover. It's that awful feeling that comes after you've been emotionally exposed in front of others. You start replaying everything, questioning how you came across, worrying about how you were perceived, and feeling raw and exposed. For INFJs, this hangover can last days. They might withdraw, become quieter than usual, or need significant alone time to process the experience. And because they're so sensitive to emotional energy, they might pick up on negative reactions that weren't even directed at them, making the whole experience even more overwhelming. This pattern teaches INFJs to avoid the spotlight as a form of emotional self-care. They know their own sensitivity isn't something they can change, so they adapt by limiting situations where they'll be emotionally exposed to large groups. It's not about being weak or unable to handle pressure. It's about understanding their own emotional ecosystem and making choices that protect their well-being. INFJs have learned that not every battle is worth fighting, and not every opportunity is worth the emotional toll it demands. 9. The responsibility burden. When an INFJ steps into the spotlight, something interesting happens. They don't just see it as attention or recognition. They see it as responsibility. INFJs have this strong sense that with visibility comes obligation. If people are listening to you, you'd better make sure you're saying something worthwhile. If you have influence, you need to use it carefully. If you're representing something, you better do it justice. This might sound noble, but it's actually pretty heavy. Every time an INFJ is in the spotlight, they're carrying this weight of responsibility that others might not even perceive. They're thinking about how their words might affect people, whether they're setting a good example, and whether they're honoring the trust being placed in them. This is exhausting. While someone else might enjoy the recognition and move on, the INFJ is left carrying this burden of responsibility long after the moment has passed. They'll think about it for weeks, wondering if they said the right things, if they helped or hurt, if they lived up to what was expected. And because INFJs tend to be empathetic and conscientious, they often hold themselves responsible for things that aren't actually their fault. Someone in the audience had a negative reaction? The INFJ will replay their words 100 times trying to figure out what they did wrong, even if that person's reaction had nothing to do with them. This sense of responsibility makes the spotlight feel less like an honor and more like a burden. INFJs would rather avoid it altogether than carry that weight. They're happy to contribute and make an impact, but they'd prefer to do it in ways that don't come with this crushing sense of obligation. 10. The power of behind-the-scenes influence. Here's something that often gets overlooked. INFJs don't avoid the spotlight because they lack ambition or don't want to make a difference. They avoid it because they've discovered they're more effective when they're not the face of something. INFJs are natural strategists and advisors. They excel at seeing the big picture, understanding complex systems, and knowing exactly what needs to happen to create meaningful change. But they don't need to be the CEO, the spokesperson, or the public figure to make these things happen. In fact, many INFJs find that they have more freedom and influence when they're working behind the scenes. They can focus on the actual work without the distractions that come with public visibility. They can be honest advisors without worrying about protecting their public image. They can take creative risks without fear of public failure. Think about some of the most influential people in history. Many of them had trusted advisors who shaped their decisions and strategy but never sought the spotlight themselves. That's the INFJ sweet spot, being the architect of change without needing to be the face of it. This isn't settling or playing small. It's strategic. INFJs understand that different positions offer different types of influence, and they've chosen the type that aligns with their strengths and values. They'd rather have genuine impact in obscurity than superficial influence in the spotlight. When an INFJ turns down an opportunity for recognition or visibility, they're not being modest. They're being strategic. They know where they can do their best work, and often that's not center stage. 11. Protecting the creative process. Finally, let's talk about creativity. Many INFJs are deeply creative. They're writers, artists, musicians, designers, or strategic thinkers who approach problems creatively. And they've learned that the spotlight can actually damage their creative process. Creativity requires a certain kind of freedom. You need to be able to explore ideas without judgment, make mistakes without consequence, and follow your intuition without having to explain every choice. The spotlight destroys this freedom. When an INFJ is publicly visible, they become more self-conscious. Instead of creating from a place of authentic expression, they start thinking about how their work will be received. Will people like it? Will they understand it? Does it meet expectations? These questions are poison to the creative process. They shift focus from the internal experience of creation to external validation. For an INFJ, this feels like betraying their art or their vision. Many INFJs have learned to protect their creative work by keeping it separate from public visibility as much as possible. They might share finished pieces, but they guard the process itself jealously. They need that private space to explore, experiment, and create without the pressure of an audience. This is why you'll find INFJs who are successful in creative fields but still intensely private about their personal lives. They've figured out how to share their work without putting themselves on display. They've found ways to contribute and connect without sacrificing the creative freedom they need. For INFJs, avoiding the spotlight isn't about hiding. It's about protecting something precious, their ability to create authentically, to contribute meaningfully, and to stay connected to their deepest values and instincts. Conclusion. So there you have it, 11 deep reasons why INFJs avoid the spotlight. And as you can see, it's not about fear, insecurity, or lack of capability. It's about understanding themselves deeply and making intentional choices that honor who they are. INFJs aren't trying to be difficult or mysterious. They're not playing hard to get or waiting for someone to drag them into the spotlight. They've simply figured out that their best work, their deepest impact, and their truest selves show up when they're not performing for an audience. If you're an INFJ, I hope this video helped you feel seen and understood. You don't need to change this aspect of yourself. The world needs people who work behind the scenes, who prioritize mission over recognition, and who bring depth and authenticity to everything they do. That's you, and it's valuable exactly as it is. And if you're not an INFJ but you have one in your life, hopefully this gives you some insight into why they operate the way they do. When an INFJ turns down recognition or steps back from visibility, they're not being self-deprecating or difficult. They're honoring their own nature and protecting their ability to show up authentically. The spotlight isn't for everyone, and that's okay. Some of the most important work happens in the quiet spaces, away from applause and attention. And INFJs? They're masters of that quiet, powerful influence that changes lives without ever making headlines. Thanks for watching. If this resonated with you, let me know in the comments. And remember, whether you're in the spotlight or behind the scenes, what matters is that you're showing up in a way that feels true to who you are. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.